Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today we are looking at another post which was passed to the developers, and the reason why this one gets its own video is because it's 5,000, well actually over 5,000 words long. So this would be a complete revamp of Enduring Confrontation. There is a lot of information, a lot of new mechanics, a lot of new ideas, so let's go through it and talk about it. The picture I'm going to use is one of the examples that is given as something that could work in these ideas, and it would be the liberation of Jersey. So let's get started. This is from Jer5345, and what he is trying to create is, as I said, Enduring Confrontation 2.0. The game mode itself, though, would be called Liberation, and it will be fixed into two separate eras. So the two separate eras would be basically World War II era, so all vehicles pre-1945, and then post-World War II era, all vehicles post-1945. So there'd be two matchmaking sets, basically. So Jer takes a little bit of inspiration from PlanetSide 2, with the idea that PlanetSide 2 was able to get over 2,000 clients on a single server. And then you have the fact that open world gaming, battle royales, people want freedom, they want scale in their gaming experiences, and Jer believes that this will be possible if a dedicated server was created on a 400 kilometers squared island map. The idea would be to populate it with large cities, capitals, smaller cities, naval ports, choke points, large oceans, as well as much of the open flat hilly terrain and mountains. So it would be realistic battle controls, so it was open to the majority of people. The game mode will be a pretty much simple conquest mode, trying to annihilate the enemy depending on what side you are on. So it would be similar to how PlanetSide works, though. The game themselves could last indefinitely, with one team either capturing all areas or being locked in constant battles at certain choke points. Once one team captures all sectors and destroys the enemy's primary HQ, the winning team takes over the entire map, similar to locking the continent in PlanetSide. So the whole premise is that the battle would be fully player controlled. So players should be able to freely set their own objectives, create massive tank platoons, bomber formations, naval groups, and also capture cities, towns, naval bases, airfields with no AI presence. So this would be obviously a huge development undertaking and probably a long-term project, but he believes it will be the next step for War Thunder's growth and would create a social hub for hundreds or thousands of players to meet in the game and on the battlefield. Obviously, this is his opinion. If this can be pulled off, War Thunder could even compete against current Battle Royale games and the like. So the game mode itself, as I said, Liberation. And when it comes to matchmaking and population, for him to keep the game balanced, the BR ranges would be simplified. Since the servers would be dedicated, they'd be dedicated into two ways. When you join a lobby in the game is already happening, and it would either be in the World War II era or the post-World War II era. So instead of having hundreds of small games at a certain BR all occurring at the same time with around 24 players each, all players from a single BR range would be put in the same game on a single massive island map. The server max population should be able to accommodate at least 2,000 players. If the max population is reached, then a new server would be created, and if there was 200 people in the matchmaking system who were looking for a game, then it would create it. If there was less than 200, a new dedicated server would not pop up, because what he wants is to start a game at least 100 versus 100. So let's talk about the beginning of the game where everything starts. So the match will be split between a defending force and also an invading force. The primary bases and the carrier group will be the primary spawns for all air, ground, naval forces at the start of the match. So the defending forces' primary bases would just be a primary airfield, a primary ground base, primary naval port, so all units can spawn at the start of the game and form groups to create objectives and decide what to do. And it would preferably be a major city at the farthest point of the invading forces, carrier spawn at the opposite end of the map. And then when it comes to the invading forces, so the other side, what you would see is the invaded forces' primary bases would be 5 aircraft carriers out on the sea on the opposite end of the map. The invading forces, they would have tanks spawn from inside the aircraft carrier in tank landing ships or LSTs, and these landing ships would be completely player controlled, just like other naval vessels, so the tank players can choose the area of the coast that they want to land on. Ground forces on the invading team should coordinate their landing ships so that they land in force at one location if they want to stick together. However, though, the landing ships are player controlled, so if the player chooses, they can go on individual routes, but of course they'd be more vulnerable. LSTs also can be destroyed like all other naval vessels, so you can actually lose your tank before you even reach the shore. And to him, this would be upping the stakes. This would require all units, patrol boats, destroyers, fighters, bombers, and the like protect the LSTs at all costs, and naval vessels will spawn behind the carriers, probably about 5 miles further out to sea, and this way the defending forces surround the carriers in a siege. It would not be a spawn-killing exploit for the Navy vessels because they would spawn in a different place. The other thing about the tank landing ships as well, because the map itself will be 400 kilometers squared, it would be impossible for the enemy to spawn kill these landing ships at the beginning of the game because it would take them an age to get over there. But in the later game, if the defending forces manage to take the coastal cities and the airfields around the coast, they will be able to destroy these ships before they reach the coastline. So this creates a strategic gameplay possibilities, forcing the invading team to protect their landing ships with aircraft or naval ships. This also forces the invading team to protect their aircraft carriers or to move their carriers to a different location if it was spotted, effectively moving their primary HQ to keep the position of their carriers hidden. And what makes this interesting is that these landing ships and all vehicles in the game will be player controlled, so large battle encounters would all be originally player driven. And in the beginning of the game, the invading force should choose strategic areas of the coast to land so that they can take cities, airfields, naval ports, and once they do this, they'll have more places to spawn, and the number of bases that they capture would move inland, so therefore they get more primary bases, and therefore they could push forward. Now, the different types of bases that will be on offer to capture for the aggressive team, you have a ground base. This would act obviously as a spawn for ground vehicles, and a ground base can be captured if it's a ground HQ, which would have a centralized and defended building inside the ground base. You would have to destroy it and then repair it with an opposing force of with an MEV. So you would have to annihilate it and then rebuild. Naval port would be the same, apart from the fact that it would spawn naval vessels. Airfield would also be the same, but at the same time would have to it would be able to spawn aircraft. Then you have the carrier base, which is obviously the primary HQ for the invading team. This can spawn supply trucks and LSTs. It will be the primary spawn for all vehicle types, air, land, and sea. The naval vessels will spawn 5 kilometers behind the carrier group. Tanks will spawn in LSTs, which will come out of the carriers, and the planes will spawn on the carrier if it is a carrier aircraft, or 5 kilometers behind the carrier group on a naval spawn as well. Any player-made FOBs will be automatically captured by the enemy since they'll be cut off from the carrier group. And the defender's primary base would be their first naval port, ground base, and airfield that they spawn at the beginning of the game. And when the defending team's primary naval port and primary airfield are destroyed, the invading team will get access to their primary HQ, which is a building located in the primary ground base of the defending team. If the invading team destroys and captures their primary ground base and destroys all player-made FOBs, the invading team wins the match. Then, obviously, player-made FOBs that we talked about before, these are forward operating bases. Players will be able to create their own bases using supplies from their primary HQ. This would use an MEV. They will be able to create ground bases which can spawn ground vehicles for added reconnaissance and support. Player-made FOBs can also become a primary HQ if the defender's primary ground base is destroyed or captured. And also, if a base is severely damaged, vehicles will no longer be able to spawn until the buildings are repaired by an MEV. So, capturing sectors. So, only ground forces can capture ground bases, naval ports, and airfields. So, there won't be any frontline markers on this map. There'll be no artificially created movement of forces. Everything will be player-driven, similar to a Battle Royale game, which is completely dynamic and unpredictable. There will be a natural fog of war. Ground bases, airfields, and naval ports themselves are the capture points, and they'll be in every major city, small town, and then also, if no team has captured the base yet, it is neutral and can be captured simply by surrounding the base HQ. If the base has already been captured, the other team must first destroy the base HQ and then repair it with a military engineering vehicle. Once a base is captured, that sector of the map will be in their control, but there will be no markers to tell that it is their territory or that they are occupying that location until they're visually spotted in that area. If a player runs across enemy supply lines, enemy structures, or groups of enemy forces, they should first take pictures of the area by doing reconnaissance for their team. The only identifying marks of the enemy ground base will be the flags surrounding the base itself. And on each island, so on each map basically, there will be a total of 10 capturable naval ports, 40 capturable ground bases, and 20 capturable airfields. And the island will be split into 10 geographical sectors. Each sector will contain 1 naval port, 4 ground bases, and 2 airfields. And once a team has captured a full sector, that area of the island will change to the team's color, signifying that it is their territory. Uncaptured sectors will be neutral on the map until captured, and once a team captures all sectors, they can attempt to destroy the primary HQ of the enemy, either the invading team's carrier group or the defending team's primary base, naval port, and airfield. So the defending team, when it comes to defending their thing, basically the defending team wins when they destroy the enemy carrier group. So the main HQ for the invading team is the carrier group itself, and it allows the units to spawn. Once the defending team captures all sectors and finds the carrier group, it can launch an offensive against it to try and sink the carrier group. So once the carriers have been sunk, the defending team will win the match. The invading team, it's a little bit more complicated. The main HQ itself for the defending team is a centralized building within their primary ground base spawn. This would mean that it would be the most defensive and most defended, and hardest to capture. The defenders main HQ would be inside of their main ground base, which would also be near the naval port. The location would mean that in order to successfully destroy the defender's primary HQ, the invading team would destroy their primary naval port, capture the primary airfield, and also destroy the primary ground base. Once all of these have been accomplished, therefore the aggressors would win the match. This could be difficult since a player from the defending side could just keep spawning MEVs and create a new player-made ground base in a different location, which would become the primary base. Then the economy. So if you spawned on a supply base, this will cost you no silver lions, only in-game supplies. If they're spawning on an unsupplied base, it will cost the same to spawn the specific vehicle as it is in Enduring Confrontation. This incentivizes players to use the supply truck system, and also they will make silver lions through it. Kills will gain the same amounts of silver lions as it does in EC already. SL and RP will will also be granted for accomplishing mission objectives such as providing a reconnaissance, supply drops, conquering sectors, destroying and capturing enemy bases, and destroying player-made FOBs as well. The supplies. So now we get into the new game mechanics. There is a lot of stuff on offer when it comes to the game mechanics of this. This is another picture of how the whole thing would look. So the first new game mechanic is supplies. So in order to spawn a specific base, it will need to be full on supplies. Supplies will be constantly generated from a primary ground base or tier 5 player-made FOB. Every spawn burns an amount of supplies that specific base has, and if the base runs out of supplies, that specific base becomes inactive until it is resupplied by supply trucks. Supply trucks can be used by players to deliver supplies to bases to keep spawns active. These supply trucks can be ambushed, they can be destroyed, they can be annihilated even by artillery, and therefore you'd have to go back and get them from the primary HQ. Supply trucks can only spawn from the primary HQ, so it might take a while to get across 200 kilometers. For the defending team, it will be their primary ground base. So for the invading team, it will be the carrier group. So this would create real supply lines, which you would see in certain wars. Supplies can also be used to upgrade base defenses. The more supplies a base has, the more defenses it can build. For the invading team, they will not have a primary ground base like a defending team. Therefore, the first ground base that they capture will become their primary ground base. After the invading team establishes their primary ground base, they will be able to spawn supply trucks from that location instead of the carrier group. And if MEV players upgrade their FOBs to tier 5, they can spawn supply trucks from those bases as well and use them as a secondary source of supply. Then you have player-made bases, so we already talked about this, where players can use MEVs and supply trucks together to create forward operating bases. These can be used to spawn in ground vehicles, reconnaissance, or to create another front line on the battlefield. And yeah, in order to create a base, you'll also need supply trucks to supply the base. Upgradable bases as well. So the idea, as we talked about, if you have a ground base, a naval port, or an airfield, you can upgrade its defenses over time. So get more AA defense, it would get more stuff, and you do this through supply trucks. So the more supply trucks you have in the area, the more chance you can to upgrade your base. Tier 1 upgrade like base is a small ground base of 4 bunkers. It's able to spawn light armored vehicles. Then a tier 2, 6 bunkers, can get light and medium vehicles and AA vehicles with more base HP. Tier 3, medium ground base of 8 bunkers, spawn heavy tanks, LRVs and MEVs, AA vehicles, and also more defense capabilities, more HP. Tier 4 have 10 bunkers, can spawn heavy tanks, LRVs, MEVs, AAAs, and increase perks such as spotting range, faster repair time for player vehicles, and also more base HP again. Then Tier 5, which can only be for player-made FOBs, you have very large ground base of 12 bunkers and a small airfield, can spawn heavy tanks, LRVs, MEVs, AAAs, increase perks, when was perks mentioned? More base HP, can spawn supply trucks, create a ton of supplies, allowing supply trucks to refill at this base instead of having to go all the way back to the main base. Then we have the next new mechanic, which is the Invading Forces Mobile Carrier Group. The Invading Forces primary HQ is the carrier. We've already been through this. They should be protected at all costs. We've already been through this. Let's see. It's also able to use a Reconnaissance Camera to be able to see things when it comes to the recon of the area. Since carriers are mobile, the team will be able to actively move the carrier group to a new strategic location to avoid being spotted. Currently, I'm not sure whether having the team vote to move the carrier would work or having a commander role in-game would be simpler. For 1,000 player battles to actually occur in the game would require organization of platoons or squads making in-game. This would be kind of crazy. Either way, this would be a great mechanic to develop to see if people can work together. Since the map would be 400 kilometers squared, there would be plenty of space to be able to, move the carrier group around and prevent a big assault. Then you have aerial mine laying. Basically says what it is on the tin. Players will be able to drop mines and create a minefield, therefore create more strategic gameplay on the map. And then we have reconnaissance, so aerial, naval, and ground reconnaissance. So all player vehicles will be equipped with an F-24 aerial reconnaissance camera. So in this game mode, there are no markers unless players actively take photos of the enemy vehicles, player bases, and structures. Structures such as player-made bases, naval bases, ground bases, and airfields will be marked on the map for the player's team. Enemy vehicles that are moving will be marked for a limited amount of time, as much time as that of a blind hunt order. However, if the marked enemy manages to leave the sector that has been marked, his marker will disappear, meaning that his original location has been lost. So this would basically simulate radio communication. That is what they're trying to create, line of sight detection, and also make real reconnaissance an actual gameplay mechanic. Right now in War Thunder, spotting by line of sight automatically signals the position of enemies on the map on your team. If you're in arcade, this would open up many possibilities. So the example given is for a fighter squad, if they conduct reconnaissance of an area where they find tanks, ground structures, or any player vehicles within the camera shot, the enemy vehicles or structures will be marked on the map for their team. Similarly, a tank group under fire can take photos of the enemy tank locations if they're dug into a town, and this will mark a location on the map. A team of fighters, attackers, or bombers could also provide CAS to the marked location for the friendly tanks. Doing reconnaissance and making enemies should also net the player lions. So if a marked enemy is destroyed within the amount of time it has been spotted, you'll get a reconnaissance award, which means that you'll get more incentive to recon. Spotting visually and with binoculars with tanks will only signal your surrounding teammates in your immediate vicinity to their in-game marker and will not mark the enemy on the map for your entire team. Using the reconnaissance camera, however, will mark them on the map as if they were spotted with a blind hunt. This applies to only ships and tanks and not air units. Air units will have SB spotting mechanics applied, meaning that there will be no markers for air units. Now, another mechanic which is being added, all vehicle access while in-game. So this game mode will only work if players are able to switch their crewed vehicles in-game to any vehicles they own in their tech trees. So for example, the game mode World War II would be Allies, so France, USA, Britain, and Russia versus Axis, Germany, Italy, and Japan. And players must be able to switch vehicles for their crews to any plane, tank, or ship they currently own within their side's lineup without having to go back to War Thunder's main menu. You should be able to swap vehicles for crew and swap nations in-game, as long as it is still a nation that is on your team's side. A reason for this would be game flow. As the game progresses, it may be more beneficial to bring out a naval lineup instead of a tank lineup, which obviously makes sense. The next new mechanic would be multi-client vehicles. So the ability to have multiple real players man a single vehicle. In-game, the player should be able to meet up and jump into a friendly player's vehicle as their crew. In the hangar, players should also be able to enter a game in a single vehicle together, as long as there is enough crew. For the aircraft in-game, you'll be able to switch from their own vehicle to a squad member's vehicle while in the airfield. In order to activate the mechanic, that needs a taxi next to it, accept and decline, all that stuff. For tanks, you'll have to be at their spawn location, drive next to a fellow tanker, request ride, accepted and declined, same with ships. Then you'd have a real day-night cycle as well. He wants this game mode to last a few hours in the least, and will be a persistent mode. so therefore it'll have real-time weather, full day-night cycle. A good time frame for players to visualize this day-night would have 2 hours of daytime and 30 minutes of night, so that's what he's going with. And then thunderstorms, large clouds, and rainy weather are very rare in military operations, and therefore military operations demand clear weather and high visibility. Therefore, get rid of the clouds. Then we have some new strategic vehicles as well. These would be the MEV, the military engineering vehicle. We already talked about what this would do. It would be able to create and repair bases and the such. LSTs, so landing ship tank. This is just a landing ship you control while trying to get your tank to the shore while you're getting shot at by everything and its mother. Then you got the MTT, which is the military tactical truck, which is a supply truck. This obviously moves supplies. Mine layers, creates minefields, and LRVs, light reconnaissance vehicles or scout vehicles, which you can move around the place. Then, as we talked about, when it comes to these maps, these are the general maps that are going to be at least looked at. So you have the map of Jersey, which is being used as a kind of idea when it comes to where to put the zones. Then you've got Kish, which would be the post-World War II idea. This is the coast, off the coast of Iran. This is 94 kilometers squared, so this is what it would look like with the zone idea. So these are two examples of what you could see on these maps. So yeah, that is Enduring Confrontation 2.0 Liberation. My only opinion on this is go and play World War II online. I'd just like to thank Trigger Hippie, Universe, Conte Baraka, Elove Goat, Eugens Terry, Ambrosius McClellan, Daniel Stanton, Martinez, B. Young, Hans, and Samuel Slick for supporting the channel.